Welcome to the Lentil Intervention Podcast, talking all things movement, whole food nutrition and environmental wellness with your hosts, Ben and Emma.
Hello everybody and welcome to another episode, number 18 of the Lentil Intervention Podcast. My name is Ben Alderberg, coming to you from Auckland, New Zealand, and from Boona, Australia, Emma Strutt. Hello Emma.
Hello Ben, how are you today?
Very excited because we have reached a small milestone, and that is that we're finally doing our first giveaway. So as you all know, looking at the title of the podcast, we're going to be talking about a new book that's out, and we are so privileged that we have got 2 books per country. Now, when I say per country, not every country around the world, but 2 books for Australia, 2 books for New Zealand. So we're looking after all our local listeners to give away. And if you want to know how you can get in the draw, wait till the end of the show. So Emma,
we're just dropping that teaser to begin with.
Oh, we're really going to tease this one out.
Yeah. All right. So today we are very lucky to have the phenomenal Ondine Sherman join us to chat about her new book, amongst many other things. Her new book is called Vegan Living, A Simple Guide to a Cruelty-Free, Healthy, Plant-Based Life. Now, Ondine is already an established author, but this is her first foray into non-fiction work. And may I just say she's kicked things off with a bang in this arena. It's a really beautiful and well thought out book. So whoever does end up winning, you're very lucky. Ondine is the co-founder and managing director of the Animal Protection Institute Voiceless, which does absolutely amazing and critical work. She holds a BA in Communication, a Master's in Environmental Studies, and also serves as director of the conservation NGO This Is My Earth, and is an ambassador for Action for Dolphins. So one very, very busy lady. Ondine, thank you so much for coming on. We're really appreciative that you could spare some of your time to talk to us today. And you're joining us all the way from Tel Aviv. So a big hello. How are you?
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Emma and Ben. I'm really happy to be talking to you both from the other side of the world.
Very literally. Ondine, so much to talk about. But first, Tel Aviv in Israel, known as one of the most progressive and, evolving place in the world to be in terms of veganism. And you've recently moved there. What's it like living there?
Yeah, it is. It's like a vegan haven. It's, I think, unofficially called the vegan capital of the world. And it's driven, largely by young people. So it's a very kind of cool, hip vegan lifestyle and amazing food and lots of choices and, like a big awareness. Like I mentioned in my book, I think the biggest march or protest for animals and for veganism was in Tel Aviv a couple of years ago. I think there were about 30,000 people. So it's just, it's really nice to be surrounded by so many like-minded people.
So tell us, firstly, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your journey to veganism. I know you talk a lot about it in your book, but you're originally from Sydney in Australia. Tell us a little bit about your life journey.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Sydney, and at the age of 7, I went veggie. And the kind of family story, is we were sitting around the kitchen table. My grandmother was living with us, and she had made tongue for dinner, which is like delicious. A traditional Eastern European dish. And I think that inspired me or horrified me when I asked, I remember holding the fork with this kind of brown, weird looking piece of meat. I'm like, what is this? And she said, it's tongue, darling. I was like, somebody's tongue? She said, yes, an animal's tongue. I'm like, we eating somebody's tongue? It's just shocking. I think a lot of kids go through that moment when they connect the dots between animals and food, and it is quite a traumatic moment, and I've met so many people who have referred to that as like a really huge memory for them. I think what comes next is different for everybody, and the attitudes of the family, and and what happens. For me, I decided to become vegetarian, and I think my family thought it was just a stage that I'd outgrow. But then I was walking with my dad, and I stumbled upon a table that Animal Liberation New South Wales had set up with all these, images and petitions and information about factory farming and all the horrific things that happen. And I was just, again, horrified. So I subscribed to their magazine and started getting their magazine every month or so. And I remember lying on my bedroom's, floor as I must have been around 10 or 11 at this point, reading all these. Like I remember reading an account of a slaughterhouse or an abattoir of a piggery and all the abuse that was going on. And yeah, I promised myself at that point. I remember my dog was lying next to me, and I said to her, like, I promise I'm going to try and stop this, when I become a grown up. And that always stayed with me. And then, fast forward. Well, I was quite active as a teenager and going to protests and things, but later on I had the opportunity with my father, Brian Sherman, to start Voiceless together. That was 16 years ago. And yeah, I feel very fortunate that he, shared the same values as me. He became a vegetarian a few years after I did. And when we when we started Voiceless, that's when I started understanding through the research we were doing into the dairy industry and the egg industry that vegetarianism, there's still a lot of cruelty involved in these other industries, arguably I think even more so in the dairy industry, just with the kind of lifetime of exploitation the dairy cows go through. So it was a kind of a long road, but it's always been a passion of mine since I was a little girl to, make this my life's work. And I'm really happy that I have found ways to do that through Voiceless and writing.
And now Voiceless, it represents animals in the court of law as they can't do it themselves. And I find it's almost ironic that it all started with you eating tongue, like literally how someone
Right.
speaks. So yeah.
I've actually got a confession to make. I would have been very young and also had tongue on my plate. And I've only ever had one bite my whole life. And I just could not conceptualize the thought of a tongue, chewing on a tongue. We go through life avoiding chewing our own tongue, and here we are chewing someone else's tongue. But I just didn't take that big step like you did, Ondine. I just didn't. I mean, I did go vegetarian, not because of that, but also the vegetarian journey, which I think a lot of us go down the path thinking that we're doing good, for the animals, and we're not, imparting in cruelty, and milk's okay, the cow's still living and it's living a life and eating grass, but like you say, how wrong we are, and it's probably one of the worst industries as well. So it's an interesting journey that.
I mean, veganism wasn't really a thing, back in those days, to our defense, although, I wish I would have gone vegan earlier, but even the word vegetarian I had to explain it to people back in the 70s and 80s, like it wasn't normalized and it wasn't, very common. So I think, things have moved really fast, and it's been a great, progression of the movement. And we only know what we know. So it's not a surprise. It's not an accident that we didn't know these things, because, these industries, obviously, one of their main objectives is to prevent people from knowing the cruel things that happen, because that would affect their sales. So they'll do everything and anything to prevent information getting out.
And like you say, you only know what you know, but even more so, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And that's the dangerous part.
Yeah.
Now, Voiceless has evolved into a really wonderful organisation. You've got, you've incorporated school learning as well as the animal law. So can you expand a little bit about what Voiceless does?
Yeah, thank you. We've been going for 16 years. We've done many things over the years. The last few years, however, we took quite a big change in strategy to really focus on youth and education because, I believe and my whole team is very passionate about, engaging young people in the movement and not only in the movement, but engaging them in processes of critical thinking and questioning and discussing and debating issues. Because, obviously the young people today are going to be our future, politicians and CEOs and lawyers and artists and writers. And it's a real kind of hole in the animal protection movement. It's, there's a lot of groups that do wonderful work campaigning and protesting and, lobbying government. But as, before we really began, the only groups that were engaging with school students about animals were industry organizations. So, the Australian Pork Limited, Dairy Australia, the Egg Corporation. So all of their information they were receiving was, by vested interests and obviously biased towards pro-industry, which just seems quite outrageous when you think about it.
And you find that especially in the low socioeconomic areas as well. So those are the industries that sponsor meal programs, a breakfast or, once a week for the low socioeconomic schools for kids that can't afford it. And that's all they know.
Yeah, and they have budgets of, millions of dollars. I mean, these are multi-billion dollar industries. So, we're not trying to compete with them as such because our budget is, 1/1000th of theirs. But just putting in some alternative perspectives and allowing students to kind of research and think for themselves as to what the issues are and what they think about them. So yeah, and then in terms of law, one of the biggest areas of growth we've seen, which has been really exciting since we started, was the growth in animal law. Animal law at universities. When we began, there was one university teaching animal law, and now there's around 14 or more. And Voiceless has been, working really hard to grow that area because if, animals in the law are considered as property and as, really valueless and worthless except for their economic worth. So there's a lot of work to do in the law to kind of readdress the way animals are seen and valued, because we all know animals are sentient, they have inherent value, but that's not considered valid under the law. They're considered the same as a table or a chair or just as a piece of property.
So with this new tweak in strategy and focusing more on the youth, have you seen a positive outcome of that? Are you seeing accelerated change? Are you seeing more action as a result of that?
I mean, I think it's a more long-term strategy. It's not, you don't get that immediate.
It's an investment.
Buzz, from like a campaign when you suddenly see thousands of signatures. But often campaigns, not that I'm anti-campaigns, they're excellent and they're very important, but we've seen historically in Australia, sadly, that some of the biggest, most important and well-known kind of campaigns for change, like as banning live export or, banning the greyhound racing or puppy farms, some of the obvious common sense ones, that have the majority of support from Australians just don't get through and no change really occurs. So I think it's really important to have this fundamental real paradigm shift that's going to come from a new generation, because the people currently in the decision-making roles in government and industry and, companies, just it's just harder to change their hearts and minds. They don't have the values that will lead them to prioritize animals over, an economic interest.
Yeah. And
So,
that's why your work is so important, because you see this every year with the Melbourne Cup. There's a groundswell of support of people, ban the cup, up to the cup, that kind of thing. But then it quickly falls off everyone's radar. Time moves on. So what you're doing behind the scenes is so incredibly vital.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I really believe in the power of, youth and the next generation, and it's a tried and true, method that leaders around the world have used for good and for bad purposes historically. Getting young people involved is a very powerful strategy for creating change and social change. So, but we have gotten, the feedback we've gotten has been excellent from students and teachers. And we're just looking at trying to get, our resources out more and, access the schools more. And we're developing partnerships with lots of different education providers. And it's going well. It's slowly but surely.
Oh, look, I think as the older one gets a bit harder to change a lifestyle that's been embedded, except in the circumstance of health. Suffer a heart attack. Oh, maybe I should change the way I eat. But with the younger generation, you things are not as embedded. You're a bit more open-minded, and that is probably where the biggest growing population is in the late teens and in the 20s is where the bigger movement lies. I was just telling Emma earlier, I just spent the weekend in Dunedin, south of New Zealand, which is a very sort of university-dominated city, and proportionally, according to the population, there's more vegan cafes, more vegan options to eat out because it's supported by the student community. So, the younger generation is absolutely the ones that are more open to other reasons for vegan living, the title of your book, and especially what you focus on in terms of ethical sort of way of living, and that's correct, and the whole climate sort of environmental aspect as well. So it's absolutely
young people they're growing up in a world where they're fearful about climate change and fearful about the state of our environment, and they want to make a difference. And now we understand that animal agriculture is one of the biggest culprits of climate change and land clearing and desertification and deforestation, and even putting the animals aside, it's just not a viable strategy for our future and our world with our population. It's just not working.
Yeah.
So I think young people, you see Greta and the amount the amount of change and how beloved she is by young people, Greta Thunberg, and she's vegan and she's very onto these issues as well. And I think it's and also young people, if we're talking about a 14-year-old, it's only 10 years and then they're in the workforce and able to.
I think another youngster worth mentioning is Billie Eilish, a music artist that has a massive following. And, her mum, I think, has invested a lot of money in sort of plant-based meat alternatives. And Billie Eilish is very sort of outspoken as well for veganism.
Yeah.
So 100%.
Well, it's their future that we're trashing, isn't
Correct.
it? So.
Well, now speaking of which, so, Voiceless, change of strategy, focus on the youth, 100%. That's our future leaders. It's the future caretakers of the world, of the earth. What inspired the book? And more importantly, if there is one, who's the target audience for the book?
Yeah. I think it was inspired kind of by my personal experience. I've gone down a long road to become vegan. I didn't kind of do it overnight, and it's kind of been inch by inch and a slow progress. And along the way, and now especially, I get so many people kind of curious and questioning and wanting to understand, but what about this? And are you worried about this? And, from everything from like, how do you get your protein to, but what about, free range dairy cows, and what about honey, and what about, and also a lot of fears people still feel. I mean, we've been just inundated as human beings, growing up in the times we have, with messages from meat and dairy and egg industries about how it's crucial for our health and our children's health that we're consuming dairy for calcium and meat for protein and red meat for iron, and all these messages that make us very nervous to take that out of our diet, or our for a teenager taking it out of their diet. So I wanted to address basically everybody's concerns and questions. So I feel like it's for the vegan curious, for people who have been thinking about it or interested in it, but aren't quite sure how to start. And to kind of get there, because, I didn't want to just rely on my own experience. So I did a survey of about 150 vegans from, Australia and all different places, and got their thoughts about what the hardest, their hardest challenges have been, and what their, biggest recommendations are for new vegans, and so on. And I've incorporated all that advice into the book. And I think and hope it covers every question one could imagine asking about how to go vegan, all in one spot.
I would say it's actually the perfect primer for people who are interested in switching to this lifestyle. It's a really beautiful read as well, like the graphics. It's lovely. It's a nice, easy read. It's really informative, and all of those personal stories and tips and tricks as well just makes it a really lovely book to, have on your coffee table and share with people.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's the kind of book I want to have to loan out to people. And I know people should be buying this book 100%, but it's the kind of book that, my first book that really got me over the line to going vegan was the China study, because I'm very fact-driven, science. I want to know, I need to see it backed up. But it's quite an intense read, and it's very specific down the health aspect. But this book covers it all, it kind of, like you say, someone vegan curious, well, it gives you an overview of all the facets of going vegan, from the health aspects and the diet aspects in terms of the concerns around there, to lifestyle. We'll talk a little bit about all these elements shortly, but it's just that perfect overview that saves me having to talk about it. Here, read this book. And like you say, for some people, it's instantaneous. You watch a documentary like Dominion, that's it. You put your meat pizza down, I'm vegan. Boom, overnight, light bulb goes up and so on. But for a lot of other people, it's a journey. It's a phased in thing. And this book is it's perfect. I read it cover to cover, and I loved it. It's just,
thank you so much.
Just such a perfect, so for our listeners, if you don't win this book, go and buy it. And if it's not for yourself, buy it for your family that you want to try and get on board. Buy it for your partner, or buy it for your kids who are moaning at what they're eating at the table. It's just, or your work colleagues that sort of give you the weird eyes with what you're eating every day. It's just perfect. It's not forceful. It's not making outrageous claims. It's just, it's presenting it in a it's just perfectly presented, basically. So, firstly, well done on that book.
Yeah.
I think target audience, bang on. It's a perfect introduction.
Yeah, I mean, I think, sometimes vegans find themselves in a position that every time you go out and socialize, often vegans don't hang out only with vegans. It's like most of my friends and family are not vegan. Pretty much, I would say 95% aren't, or more.
Yeah.
And then, you just become the kind of focus of questions, like every dinner and every barbecue and sometimes you just don't feel like it. You don't want to be the expert on, I don't know, B12 and, the the leather industry or whatever it is people are curious about. So sometimes you just maybe want to give a sentence and two and say, look, there's a great book,
Exactly.
I'd be happy to buy it for you, or go order it yourself. And then it's just a way to kind of
that's it.
give
Buy
them
10
some help
books.
without
Buy 10 books, have them at home. Every time you got to go for a birthday party or a whatever, wrap one up. There you go. Soon you'll have 50% of your friends being vegan.
Yeah.
So I know we've already covered this a little bit already, but just putting you on the spot, why vegan? Why plant-based? What are the main reasons someone would want to make this shift?
Gosh, hard hitting.
Well, I mean, for me, I don't want to speak for all vegans. So there has been research that shows animals are the main reason that people do switch to a vegan diet. And for me, that was certainly the case, because, as soon as you involve animals in massive commercial industries, or really in any commercial industry, there's going to be cruelty involved. And, I feel like if one can live a life that's healthy and happy and, has everything you need without causing suffering, without causing pain to other people and other animals, like, isn't that the preferable life to live? Like, if we don't have to cause harm, let's not cause harm. Obviously, there's always the question, well, if you're on a desert island and there's only you and a pig, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about in today's society, we've got supermarkets, we've got access to food, we're pretty privileged in Australia and in, Western countries. So, that's, I guess, my main argument for veganism is just let's be nice and kind.
And you feel better for it.
Yeah.
100%.
And you feel better for it.
Yeah.
And then you've got all these other perks, which are extremely important. And, they inspire a lot of people as well in terms of, the animal agriculture industry causes, more greenhouse gases than the entire transport sector. So for environmentalists or people who care about the environment, you can drive your car as much as you want and don't eat a steak. It's better to not eat the steak than to not drive your car or to have shorter showers, because, animal agriculture uses way more water than people's showers do. So, the kind of things like that people haven't thought about as much. Climate change, also deforestation. We've got like 80% of the Amazon being used for animal agriculture. And, just massive land clearing. You think of in Australia, it's like the top of the environmental destruction is, land clearing for livestock and cattle and sheep. And the impacts on the soil of all these industries.
And a lot of that's in the reef catchment area. So you've got
we've covered this in past episodes. It's and it's something that's becoming more and more prevalent as well, is the whole environmental aspect. It's a lot of things that, just like the dairy industry, there's a lot we didn't know about. Well, there's even more that we didn't know about from an environmental point of view that is becoming so much more prevalent. So yes, the environmental aspect.
It's a win-win-win, it's good all around and it's healthy. So.
I was going to say, and then you're winning for your health as well.
Yeah.
All right, so that's some pretty convincing reasons. I would also just want to point out that I loved the fact that you included a section on intersectionality, because, it's all well and good to keep the meat off your plate and, if you think you're doing the best that you possibly can for the environment. But there are other aspects that we need to factor in as well. We recently had a guest who unfortunately said this while the mics were off, but they mentioned that one of the biggest risk factors to seabirds is the plastic that's in our ocean. So I really like that you touched on the fact that we need to avoid plastic and reduce our waste as well. But also with the movement, making sure that we have respectful conversations and it's an inclusive space, so including people of all colours and all ability, all socioeconomic backgrounds as well. Like, it needs to have that inclusiveness in order to grow a little bit more. So I really appreciate that you touched on that as well.
Yeah, thank you. It's been an area I've been learning a lot about recently and I find really interesting. I've been following a lot of really interesting people, on social media who are, Black Americans and vegans and involved in, anti-racism and, lots of different movements against, oppression and power and dominance and white supremacy and all these things, and they talk a lot about the intersection of all these I guess power hierarchies, just dominations of other humans and animals too. So I've been learning a lot about those areas, and some of them don't really believe in the word intersectionality so much. They see it as one system of kind of oppression. Kind of historic colonial type oppression. But also, there's the whole question of, veganism not in its mission to, or animal protection in its mission to create a better world for animals, to not, exploit or dominate, or leave out other voices during that process. So, I use an example in the book, you could have an event that's like an animal rights event or a vegan event, and be using single-use plastics, be underpaying the workers, be, not having any diversity in your lineup of speakers, only white males, be using sexist images of women in your advertising, and that's not in the spirit of veganism. It's meant to be about, dismantling these systems of oppression and exploitation for everybody as much as we can. So I think it's just about being mindful. And, I've certainly tried to do more of that. And we've had lots of discussions recently at Voiceless about how we can bring more, voices into our work. And I had an excellent chat with an Aboriginal elder a little while ago, and we'll be, posting up his interview, but, looking at other perspectives on animals and so we're not just in our little bubble of,
Because as your book covers so well, veganism is a lifestyle. I mean, hence again the name vegan living. It's not a diet, or it's not a it's not a particular element. It's a lifestyle that's all about inclusivity, and it's exactly what you've been saying now. It encompasses, you feel better for the way you behave, and the way you behave is everything that is your impact on yourself. So it could be your health, it could be your choices you make for yourself, or it could be your behavior that impacts others around you. And without getting too sort of global about this, but that's more the point that you make in this book. And I have to say, there's a lot of facets of veganism that we don't generally talk about. We're so focused on generally three key pillars, the animals, everything about the animals, that's it, blinkers on, who cares about anything else? Or it's all about the environment, or it's all about the health, exactly what you put on the plate. But people forget that it's all interconnected with all the other smaller components of it, which you include in the book. And I've learned from this book, because there's so many little things you don't think about, and it makes it so much easier to connect all the dots. And then when you're explaining that to someone else, it just makes more sense.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think it's a philosophy, and it's, people do get obsessed. I follow a lot of vegan, I followed the hashtag vegan living, for example, a few months ago, and, to see what came up on my feed. And it's, I would say 95% food, which is funny, because it's not, for me, food is really the least of my priorities. I mean, I'm really not a big food obsessed focused person. I know there are a lot of people out there who are, and that's wonderful, and I'm happy to go and eat at their places and enjoy their food. But that's not my motivation, and it's not really my what I'm passionate about. I want to hear about all these other areas that these other areas that don't get talked about, and the minority groups and the marginalized groups that aren't getting a hearing, and I heard someone the other day talking about, veganism and disability, and how, you can have vegan events that aren't, accessible for disabled people, or that are totally inappropriate for
Yes.
people with disabilities. And it's like saying that we can't always be 100% perfect and be everything for everyone. And, I acknowledge that. But as much as we can, and just being mindful and thoughtful about being inclusive and not being offensive, and passing the mic and giving people the ability to speak about their issues. I think that's the goal. And I think we're slowly moving towards that, which is wonderful, because it certainly wasn't like that at the beginning, in the movement. Like I'd never ever heard from my days, as an 11-year-old kid reading those magazines, about any other intersectional issue. So it's wonderful, and it's really exciting that all of this is kind of coming together.
Brilliant. Now, you also touch on in the book, we've already kind of covered this a little bit, but it's not just about the food, it's about fashion and lifestyle and advocacy as well. So what are your top tips there if someone is listening to this and feeling really inspired and they want to, do their bit and get more involved in advocacy? What would you recommend?
Fashion is fun. It's and there's that, these days there's so many awesome vegan fashion brands around to have a look at. I mean, back in the day, I stopped wearing leather when I was about 15, and it's kind of a bit depressing because I really wanted Doc Martens, for example, and couldn't get them. And now they have vegan Doc Martens.
Yeah.
But I guess my biggest tip is to start with leather, because leather, a lot of, people believe in this kind of myth around leather just being a byproduct. So, well, the cows are killed anyway, so we may as well take their leather, their skins, and make use of them. But that's not the case. It's I think a $300 billion industry, global industry. It's a co-product. So it's a hugely profitable industry in its own right, and it's number 5, the leather industry, most toxic industry in the world because of the tanning process of leather, and all the pollution that creates for the water systems. But there hasn't been much attention given on the leather industry. It's quite secretive and hard to find information on. But, a lot of leather comes from India.
Yes. Yeah.
And, there's a lack of, a lot of...
Which is so ironic.
Protection laws there, yeah.
Considering...
I know, it is ironic.
How sacred the cow is. And
well, there's a really good section in the documentary Earthlings that covers that and how it's handled. That's right.
Tell you what, this whole section, Ondine, that you covered on leather is one area that I honestly, when I read this, I had no clue. And... for instance, I don't purchase anything that's got leather myself now as well, and I've pretty much got rid of anything that's leather. But I know in the past, if I would have ordered, I don't know, an electronic item that came directly from China, and you get this leather case that comes with it, it's going to be cheap leather, and it's in the book, so I don't need to give it away now, but it's not likely to come from a traditional source of leather, i.e. a cow. It can be any animal.
Yeah, it's very unregulated.
I was horrified when I read this, and it's just, wow. Yeah, there's a lot we don't know.
Yeah, so I think that's, because leather is such a kind of common and day-to-day, thing in everybody's lives. We don't even think twice, even when we buy a car, leather seats. Often it can be kangaroo leather seats, and the kangaroo industry is, an issue I cover as well. But it's a huge thing. So, though there's a lot of other issues in terms of fashion and fabrics and beauty products and so on, I feel like that's one. The leather industry is the one we need to shine a spotlight on as a priority.
I can't understand with the whole, such a big part of the world being anti-fur, that there's still more fur being used. And I just don't comprehend that. It was very fashionable, fur, and then so much of the world has gone anti it, and yet there seems to be more of it. It's just so incongruent with how we think the world is progressing, and yet it just seems to be regressing, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes between, these very wealthy, powerful industries and, decision makers that, doesn't get reported on and doesn't get a look in. But yeah, when you're dealing with kind of multi-million or billion-dollar industries, it's challenging to dismantle them and to stop them. They'll fight for their survival, which I guess brings me back to the point that we need like a whole new attitude towards animals and valuing animals to really kind of address these issues. Because kind of the superficial choices, although they're good and they're important, we're dealing with like 70 billion farmed animals being killed every year. It's like staggering numbers, as well as obviously all the wildlife and, the fur farmed animals and so on. So we're up against, it's David and Goliath. We're up against some very powerful industries with a lot of connections in high places.
Right. So I think by now
you're very ominous. Sorry.
No. I was just going to say, with the topics that you've covered, you've probably convinced anyone who's listening who isn't already plant-based to maybe think about this a little bit more. But I mean, it's changed a lot. We've got a lot more resources. There's more people living this way, but it still can be a little bit of a lonely space sometimes. So you talk a little bit about this in the book, about finding your community, but what are your tips there for someone who really wants to give this a crack but is a little bit lonely and doesn't know where to reach out to or how to start?
Yeah, I mean, I feel that's a really important area because studies have shown that there's quite a high level of recidivism, I'm forgetting how to pronounce the word, of vegans who backtrack, people who start becoming vegan and then it feels too hard. And the main reason for that, according to the studies, is because people do feel isolated and don't feel supported. And it can be tough socially. If your family isn't behind you and your friends are making fun of you, it can feel like a very lonely, difficult road. So I've given some tips as to how to, make this to the most joyful and positive experience one can have. I guess one of my big tips is to not cut off from people. It can be hard when you've suddenly kind of step through the door in the matrix and seeing like a whole nother world taking the pill and being like, wow, all this horrific stuff is going on, and I can't believe, my beloved friends and my family who I love and respect, don't think about it and care about it like I do, and how could they not? And then you feel angry with them and you fight with them. But we need to remember that everybody has their own path. Sometimes one can plant a seed with someone and it'll sprout years later. And, often being a role model and just living your best life is actually what inspires people to do it. And people don't respond well to being judged and made, to feel guilty. Yeah. So it's not like an effective strategy to kind of like force your close ones or try and force them to kind of do what you're doing. And something that I read which was really interesting, there's a woman called Dr. Melanie Joy who's written a lot about this subject, is appreciating your vegan allies. I mean, I have friends and family who aren't vegan, but they'll really think of me whenever they, if we go to a restaurant, they're like, oh, let's choose a vegan restaurant. Or if I'm coming over, they'll make a whole vegan meal, or they'll, just support me and my vegan journey in the way they can. And that's important too, and we should appreciate those people in our lives, and kind of just let go of the feeling we need to try and convert them, because otherwise we cut off from our support networks. Having said that, it is very important to build a support network of vegans outside of one's regular social life or family life. And that, that's really easy to do now on social media. There's so many Facebook groups, that people connect on. And obviously Instagram, there's also vegan festivals and vegan markets and vegan events. And now it's all online through Zoom. I went to the, vegan festival in UK online and, heard some interesting talks. So I think bringing all that vegan support into your life, but at the same time, trying not to be too judgmental or angry at our, close ones for not yet going down that path. Because often people do surprise you, later on. And even if they make small changes, that's also, we should celebrate everybody's. If you go out for dinner with your family and you go to a vegan restaurant because they're, being respectful of you and your needs, then that's one meal that everybody's eaten that is plant-based. So that's, a moment to celebrate, rather than getting angry with them that the next meal they do is in the steakhouse or something.
Absolutely. I think it is about, just everyone's walking their own path, finding the joy in eating. And, before I was vegan, I used to think, why would I ever want to do that? That is so stupid. Like, everyone gets there in their own time, in their own way. So, you're spot on about just being respectful and supportive and appreciating the people that support you. And I can hear your little doggies in the background.
Sorry about that.
That's Ondine's community.
Yeah, I've got 3
That's
dogs
your support
milling
network.
around. I don't know, they all choose to hang out next to me.
But that's exactly the point, Emma. It's you got to remember that you were there yourself.
Exactly.
You were the one. I was too. Vegans, weirdos. What do they eat? Where do they get their protein from? It's all the same stuff. But it's it reciprocates. You still got to have good friends. If they're going to be super critical the whole way, well, it's better to have friends that are supportive. And one of my favorite tips is always, well, if you're going to eat out, be the organizer, be the one that chooses the restaurant. Then you can control some of those small elements as well. And nowadays there are amazing plant-based eateries that half the time you wouldn't even know it's plant-based. You actually got to ask the question, is this plant-based? And it's like, yep, the whole institution's plant-based. So it is getting easier though. It's certainly easier than it was 20 years ago, that's for sure. So it's more accessible. Yeah. It's easier to be sociable as well and go out. And if it's not a vegan or plant-based institution, there are vegan options, and all you have to do is ask. And I've told the story in the past of where you least expect it, a chef will come out and say, I'll look after you, and it's just becoming more common. And we're a good industry. You wouldn't want to turn our businesses away. So, a restaurant would be silly to not cater. So certainly easier.
And, like you said, being the organizer, you can also be the person who brings the great dish to the barbecue and everyone's, crowding around going, oh, yum, what's this? And you're like, well, it's, my special vegan
Just
meal.
Don't make it a plate of leaves. Make it exciting.
Yeah, make it exciting.
I remember I was doing some work experience at a men's shed. So this is a bunch of, 60, 70-year-old men. And I brought in a chocolate cake and they all ate it and they thought it was just the best thing ever. And they were like, what did you make this with? And I was like, I made it with tofu.
Oh no, now they'll have man boobs. Oh no.
Another myth that we bust in the book.
Correct.
So. Right.
No, there's a lot of myths you tackle, which is absolutely brilliant. And again, I'll say it again, it's just a perfect book that just covers so many facets, things that I didn't think about, connects all the dots. It just makes conversation so much easier to have, and even easier because you make them read the book. So, it's just brilliant. So, Ondine, what next? I mean, okay, a little bit difficult now. I mean, your original plans were to go roadshow this a little bit and launch it, but it is available, isn't it? It's available to buy.
Yeah, it's available to buy, and it's there's some extracts coming out in different publications, like mainstream publications, which is excellent, because I wanted to get out to, the non-converted, obviously, the people who are curious. So yeah, it's exciting to have it out in the world. My next exciting project is in January, the third book in my young adult fiction series is coming out. I've written a series for teenagers, 11 to 15-year-olds, that follow a vegan character, a girl called Sky, and her journey. She's living in a small town in Australia. And yeah, this is the third book, which actually has a lot of, she's surrounded by, she goes to a vegan animal rights conference, and which is in Melbourne. And so it's got a little bit of the vegan world included in that. So I've loved writing, doing some creative writing as well. And, obviously Voiceless is my biggest passion, or my daily passion, and we're actually producing at the moment a whole suite of education resources about live export, and videos and resources for teachers in the classroom, which I think will really help help young people to really understand all the ins and outs of what's happening, not only in Australia, but as a worldwide trade, live animal trade. So yeah, a lot of things on the pipeline, and it's exciting.
And get more involved in now your new city, your new home. Replicate some of the work that you've been doing in Australia there, or like you say, just expand on Voiceless and what launch, effectively launch it in the Northern Hemisphere. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I've thought about. It's funny, I'm living here, but all my work is in a bit of an Australia English language bubble. So it's like I'm here, but not quite here. There's a lot of great stuff going on in Israel, and I would love to expand Voiceless internationally in the education sphere. And it is something that we'll look at in the future, taking our resources and making them applicable to, to other school systems in other countries, because the issues that we're discussing, and the issues obviously in the book, are global, issues that are not country specific. Absolutely. This is happening all around the world, and
especially first world. High dairy consumption, high meat consumption. It's Australia, New Zealand, Israel's part of that. The UK, US, Canada, the Netherlands. Yeah. Those are really the countries we need to be hitting hard.
And you've got some great international patrons as well. So hopefully that's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a big project because, as we've learned in Australia, like every country is very specific, culturally, how we address things, the things that people are interested in, and, the language that one would use. So we'd have to be mindful for every place we'd go to also get local people involved, so we weren't, imposing our thoughts onto another cultural country. So those are all things that are in the thinking box for Voiceless and for me. In the meantime, I'm still, my Hebrew language skills aren't where they need to be. So on the side, I've been doing some language learning, which I would need to get a little bit better if I was to launch something here. So that's the work in progress. Uses another part of my brain.
Oh, amazing. What a journey so far. So I think it is time to talk about the giveaway, Emma.
I think so.
So, like we said at the beginning of the show, we have, and a big thank you to Ondine and the team for providing 4 copies of this amazing book, Vegan Living. So what we're doing is we're splitting it, 2 books for our Australian listeners, 2 books for our New Zealand listeners. And if you live elsewhere in the world or you don't win, go and buy it. It is available online. It's pretty much all the platforms really. So Booktopia, even Kmart, I just discovered apparently sells books.
Your local bookstore.
All your local bookstores for sure, especially in Australia and New Zealand. So definitely go out and buy. Now, the giveaway. How do you get into the draw? So, firstly, you got 2 options. Firstly, social media. Either on our Instagram, on your Instagram page or Facebook account, we want you to post something that relates to you taking action. Now, if you've been a follower of a podcast, it can be anything in the realm of environmental, it can be cooking an amazing plant-based meal, it can be picking up litter.
Taking your keep cup for coffee to reduce your single-use plastic.
Anything.
Writing to your local MP.
There we go.
Be a good one.
So anything that's you taking action, make sure you tag both the Lentil Intervention podcast, so it's the Lentil Intervention, and Voiceless. So on
and give
Instagram,
them a follow.
Give them a follow too. So it's voiceless.org.au. That's their handle on Instagram. And Voiceless, the animal... I can't read my handwriting.
Animal Protection Institute.
That's it. We will put the links in our show notes, don't you worry. So make sure you tag them so we can see, and Ondine can see that you're a follower as well, and you will go in the draw. Plus, the other option is leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Now, reviews, not just a rating. We've had some beautiful ratings. We're currently 5 out of 5, which is amazing. Thank you so much. But we need reviews because reviews help boost our profile, helps get the podcast out there to more listeners. So leave a review and you go in the draw as well. If you do both, you go in the draw twice. Emma, anything else we want to add to that?
No, that's pretty much it. So we'll be letting people know who the lucky winners are on the next show, so you'll have to tune in. But yeah, get active, take a picture, let us know that you are doing so. And as Ben said, if you're not lucky enough to win this book, we would highly recommend still going out and purchasing a copy. It's a brilliant read. Ondine, thank you very, very much for coming on and talking us through it.
Thank you guys so much, and thank you for all the work you do, and raising awareness of the environment and animals. And I love listening to your podcast. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And it's raising awareness and taking action. That's where it really counts. So again, thank you so much for coming onto the show, Ondine.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Lentil Intervention podcast. If you found this interesting, make sure you subscribe and share it with your friends.